In the village tea house at dusk, Hannah sat with an old cup of cooling tea and a stack of letters. The fire in the hearth cast shadows that flickered over her face as she sorted through each missive, searching for the one to send back tonight. Beside her, June, who had come home from sea days ago, now rested his arm on the table, watching Hannah with an unreadable expression. As the light dimmed outside, the tea house filled with the soft hum of conversation and clinking cups. Children darted past them, running errands for their parents. The scent of salt and smoke lingered from June's travels, mixing with the earthy aroma of the dried herbs hung above each table. Hannah found the letter she was looking for near the bottom of her pile, crinkled at the edges, as if it had been carried close to the heart before being sent. She turned it over in her hands a moment longer than necessary, then handed it across the table to June without meeting his eye. "Take this," she said simply. "It's time." June looked down at the letter for a long while before nodding and tucking it into his shirt pocket. His gaze lifted slowly toward Hannah's face. "I've been thinking," he began, voice low, as if reluctant to break the quiet. "I should have. I don't know, asked more questions maybe." Hannah's fingers tightened around her empty cup handle, her knuckles turning white beneath the glow from the hearth. She nodded but didn't look up at him. June shifted in his seat, drawing a deep breath that he let out slowly. "I remember how you used to tell me about this place," he said, looking past her towards the windows as if catching a glimpse of another time through them. "You'd talk about everyone here with such care and detail. I should have listened more." Silence fell again between them, heavy but not oppressive. Outside, rain began to patter softly against the roof tiles, rhythmic and soothing. The sound seemed to fill the space around them, a reminder of the world moving on without pause or prejudice. "Tomorrow," Hannah finally said, her voice barely audible over the rain's steady beat. "I'll make you some tea when you wake." June nodded once more, his eyes catching hers now with renewed determination. He reached out and took her hand in his, holding it gently for a few moments without speaking or looking away. Then he stood up and left as quietly as he'd come, the sound of rain masking any noise he made on the wooden floorboards. Hannah stayed behind at their table, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup until its hollow echo filled her with something she couldn't quite name. Outside the window, a single light appeared in a neighboring house, a warm glow against the gray evening sky. The tea house clock chimed softly, 3 notes that hung briefly in the air before fading into another steady drumbeat, rain on the roof. As Hannah wrapped up her letters for tomorrow's delivery, she felt the weight of each missive lessening with each stroke of ink across paper. When done, she paused and looked around at the familiar setting, wooden walls lined with old tea stains, worn rugs laid down like welcome mats, and let a small smile tug at the corners of her mouth. She folded her arms on the table, then rested her head upon them, listening to the rain until it too grew still. When she finally raised her head again and straightened, a crumpled note lay next to her elbow, its creases softened by time and travel. Hannah picked up the small paperweight, a smooth stone June had given her years ago, and gently set it on top of the letter. The night was dark now outside, but within, a quiet peace filled the tea house, carrying with it the subtle whisper of change.
You're listening to the Empty Teahouse. The last ember in the hearth cast one final glow before fading to black. Dusk deepened, and the old village street cooled beneath evening shadows.
The day wore on and the mist grew thick over the fishing dock. Fishermen huddled against the cold, their boats half submerged in the encroaching fog. Among them was Yuki, a weathered man who had spent his life at sea, now pulling up his nets one last time before winter's grip would make even this labor too harsh. As he worked, a knock echoed from behind him. He turned to see a small girl, no more than 12, holding out her hand and whispering over the din of waves, "May I help?" Yuki studied her for a moment, then nodded, though his fingers were stiff with age and arthritis. She moved close, and they began sorting through the slimy catch. Each fish brought up from the net was different, some glistened in silver or gold under the dim light, others, duller shades of brown, showed signs of struggle. Yuki taught her which to keep and which to return. They worked in silence for a time, the girl's small hands quick and sure beside his gnarled ones. He felt an odd comfort in this unexpected help, but also something more, a kind of kinship that transcended their age difference. The fog rolled in closer, as if even nature was listening to them now. Afterward, they stood side by side looking at the water's surface where the boats were slowly disappearing into a dreamlike haze. "Your hands are good," Yuki said quietly, wiping his own on an old towel. She blushed and smiled shyly before she asked about fishing in clearer weather, when the sea was more generous. Yuki thought for a moment of stories he had heard of summer nights under clear skies, but tonight there were only the cold clouds pressing down. He told her then about another time, not as far away yet still fading, his first catch alone, how the world seemed vast and full of promise. Now that very boat was tied up beside them. "Does it feel different?" she asked, staring at the water now thick with its own secrets. He paused, thinking of all that had changed since then, not just the passage of time but what mattered most to him. "Yes," he said softly, "every day is a new kind of fishing." She nodded slowly, understanding more than he might have guessed from her age. They stood there a moment longer until she finally stepped back onto solid land and began walking away. As she did, Yuki watched her figure grow smaller until it vanished into the mist just like so much else in his life had, like boats at sea or distant shores seen only in dreams. He returned to pulling nets again, but now with an altered feeling about what he might be catching. A seagull cried somewhere nearby, its call lonely and clear over the silent water. Yuki looked up, then down at his hands, calloused yet steady, before resuming his work under the ever-thickening sky.
The lantern flame swayed once, then steadied again. Mist thickened over the fishing dock as winter's breath grew cold.
In the village square on a market day, the air was thick with the scent of ripe apples and the chatter of villagers. Old Mr. Taka sat behind his stall, where he sold handcrafted wooden bowls. His calloused hands moved slowly as he wiped each bowl clean with an old rag before placing it back in its spot. The wooden bowls were simple, yet beautiful, some smooth from years of use, others freshly turned and waiting for the first touch. Beside him, a young woman named Yuki pushed her way through the crowd carrying a basket full of wildflowers she had picked that morning. She paused near Mr. Taka's stall, drawn by the quiet rhythm of his movements and the softness of his smile as he tended to his wares. Unlike others who sought to sell or buy briskly, Mr. Taka seemed content with each breath he drew and each bowl he polished. Yuki watched him for a moment before approaching and laying her basket next to his stall. He looked up from his work, eyebrows raised in surprise at the colorful display of blooms now alongside his bowls. Without saying a word, she began arranging them around his wooden creations, careful not to damage any petals, but bringing life and color to his simple offerings. Mr. Taka watched quietly as Yuki worked beside him. Once she was done, she straightened up, dusting off her hands with an almost shy smile. "Do you like them?" she asked softly. He nodded slowly, eyes crinkling at the corners in a small but genuine laugh. "I do," he said. "Thank you." The two sat quietly for a while longer as market-goers moved about around them. Some paused to admire Yuki's arrangement or the bowls, sometimes making purchases, and other times simply moving on. Yet through it all, both Mr. Taka and Yuki remained there, their own quiet conversation filling the space between. As the day began to wane and shadows crept across the square, a gentle breeze stirred, carrying with it the faint scent of apple blossoms from nearby orchards. Without another word exchanged, Yuki gathered her flowers back into her basket, while Mr. Taka collected each bowl he had sold during the day. Just as she was about to leave, Mr. Taka placed one of his wooden bowls gently in her hands. It was small and perfect for holding wildflowers, but also useful for countless other purposes. She looked down at it, then back up at him with a question in her eyes. He simply nodded. "For you." Touched by the gift, yet unsure how to respond fully, Yuki tucked the bowl into her basket beside the flowers. With that small exchange between them completed, she turned and walked away, leaving Mr. Taka behind as he returned to his work with a new sense of peace. As twilight fell over the village square, a single blossom from Yuki's arrangement had fallen onto Mr. Taka's hand-polished wooden bowl, its petals delicate against the warm brown surface. He noticed it there and paused in his movements, letting the moment rest quietly between them before he continued on.
The single petal lay untouched as evening settled over the stall. The air turned crisp in the market square's dusk, ripe apples scenting every breeze.
Under the shade of an ancient oak near the edge of a village, a well had stood for generations. Its water was pure and cool, a place where daily needs met quiet reflection. One day, two women arrived at this spot. An old woman with wrinkled hands and a young girl who carried a bucket. The old woman leaned against the well, her eyes closed as if she were listening to the earth beneath them. The girl approached, glancing nervously from side to side before setting down her bucket. She twisted the handle of the pump, but no water came out. It was stuck. "Excuse me," the girl said softly, turning to face the old woman. "The well seems dry today." The old woman opened one eye and looked at the young girl, a small smile forming on her lips. Without saying anything, she walked over to the well and took off her shawl, folding it neatly beside the bucket. Then she knelt down beside the pump. "Wait here," she said gently without looking up. The old woman began working with surprising energy, twisting and turning the handle until water gushed forth, filling the basin at its base. She straightened and smiled, nodding to herself before offering her shawl back to the girl. The young girl picked up the shawl, folding it carefully as she had seen the old woman do. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice a mix of gratitude and relief. The old woman shook her head slightly, her smile broadening. She held out a hand, gesturing towards the well water now flowing freely into the basin. The girl understood immediately. She filled up her bucket without a word and walked back to where she had come from. At noon, when the heat was at its peak, the old woman was back at the oak tree, this time with a small basket of tea leaves. She began preparing cups for anyone who might pass by, but her eyes kept returning to the well. The girl returned, her steps steady now, no longer hesitating. She paused beside the old woman and handed over one of the filled buckets she carried, which seemed slightly lighter than when it left in the morning. Without a word, the old woman took it, set it down by her side, then poured out tea for both of them to share from cups placed on stones around the tree. The two women drank their tea slowly, watching others pass but not speaking to anyone else. Once done, they exchanged cups and put them back in the basket together. As the day started to cool, people began leaving, heading home or off to work again. The old woman and the girl gathered up their things. The shawl, the bucket, now empty once more for another day's purpose. Before parting ways, the girl handed over a small coin from her pocket. She placed it in the old woman's hand, her fingers brushing against hers briefly as she did so. The old woman looked down at the coin and then up to meet the young girl's eyes with an unspoken thankfulness. With a final nod of acknowledgement, they walked away, each back toward their separate paths, leaving behind only the well that had brought them together under the oak tree once more.
The well's surface rippled slightly as if remembering their morning. A hillside terrace echoed with the aftermath of a storm's departure.
A hillside terrace after a storm. The clouds still heavy, but the wind has ceased, leaving a chill in the air and the distant murmur of water running down through the valleys. A potter stands by her wheel, wiping clay from her hands with a rag. She is middle-aged, her skin lined with quiet stories and patience. From the path winding up the hill comes an old man, his head bowed against the damp breeze. He carries a bundle wrapped in plastic, tied with string. His face shows many lines of lived time, but there's a gentle softness about him, like he's worn through his rougher edges over the years. When he reaches her, she looks up and smiles. "Good day to you," she says. He nods, his eyes meeting hers for just a moment before returning to the ground. He unrolls the plastic and begins sorting something from inside. A few potatoes, a bruised apple, some herbs wrapped in leaves. She waits quietly while he organizes this small harvest, then speaks again. "Have you been out gathering?" He pauses, glancing at her hands still coated with gray clay, before answering. "Just around the edges of my garden." She nods, understanding that he's a gardener or perhaps a farmer. The world outside these walls can feel distant and strange to those who spend much time here. "I have some extra pots," she says, gesturing towards the drying racks behind her where rows of ceramic bowls sit half-finished, waiting for their final touches. "I don't want them to go to waste." He looks at her, a question in his eyes, and she smiles again. "Take what you need," she offers. "They're yours now if you wish." The old man hesitates, then reaches out carefully with the hand not carrying his harvest and picks up one of the bowls from the drying rack. It's small, perfect for holding a meal or just sitting empty on a shelf. He turns it over in his hands, inspecting it as if searching for faults but finding only smoothness. "Thank you," he says finally. She watches him walk back down the path, her gaze following until she can no longer see him. Then she picks up her rag again and begins wiping away more clay from her skin, thinking of pots and harvests and all that's left behind on the way to what's next.
The path down the hill blurred into soft shadows as evening fell. Silence lingered, carrying the day's stories on its breath. Stay if you can. The tea house closes for the night. Until tomorrow.